fellow readers and readresses. Today I am all dressed up because we are reviewing a book and I would like to look nice for that. If you've read the title of this video and if you've seen the thumbnail, you know both my opinion of this book and what the book is. The It Girl by Ruth Ware. It's one of my most recent reads and, spoiler alert, one of my most recent disappointments, but we'll get to that. The book is listed as a standalone psychological thriller, we'll get to that, and is a little bit over 400 pages long. This is the second book I read by Ruth Ware and the last book I will read from this author. I don't want to make sweeping statements, but I believe that I wouldn't want to waste my time any longer reading books that I don't actually enjoy and that are wrongly sold to me. But again, we'll talk about it a little bit later. Let's look into the synopsis of this book. We follow a woman called Hannah who used to attend Pelham College of Oxford University like 10 years ago, alongside with a bunch of people, among which are her then roommate April and her current husband Will, who used to be April's boyfriend. April got killed back in the day, and a guy called John Neville got convicted for the murder based on Hannah's testimony. Now in the current day, Hannah is pregnant and John Neville has just died, and a reporter shows up out of nowhere claiming to be investigating the case because he thinks that John Neville might be innocent. This spurs Anna to go on an investigation of her own. And here we will come to one of the things that I actually enjoyed about this book, and that is the way that the story is told. It uses two timelines. We jump back and forth between the past and the present, where the past is called before and then the current present day is called after, and then it's explained later on why they called this way. I found that quite interesting, quite amusing. I think that the author has managed to tell the story quite nicely with those two timelines and utilizing them. And I think that summarizes pretty much everything that I enjoyed about this book. Now when it comes to the things I didn't actually like, we're going to start with the character work and more specifically the main character. Now for me to be able to properly enjoy a book, it has to have characters that I can understand. I don't have to like them, but I have to be able to understand them, to be able to make sense of what they do, to be able to empathize to some extent with them. I don't have to identify with them, but I have to care whether they live or die, and I have to care what happens to them, and I have to be able to suffer with them and be happy with them. They have to be able to invoke any sort of feeling in me. When it comes to the main character of this story, Hannah, there was none of that. The character started super bland and ended super bland. There was nothing in her to grip me. Now in the reading blog that features this book, if you haven't watched it, I will link it here. I mentioned that what I believe happened is that the author has tried to make the main character relatable to a certain portion of the audience by making her clumsy and awkward with people and nice to everybody but not very brave, all of that. I think she has tried to capture a certain portion of the audience, but to be honest, I think relatability can only go so much, and for people to be interested in following a character, they have to have a certain quality, a certain growth happening to them, something deeper than just plain relatability. And what I also dislike profoundly is when the stupidity of the main character is dressed as niceness. And I find that this author tends to utilize this sort of device for her main characters repeatedly. I have only read one other book, that was The Death of Mrs. Westaway. I have a review, I will link it over here. And in that book, I noticed the exact same thing. She is creating her main characters to be these mumbling fools, and then dresses that as niceness. I don't know if that's a word. It's just really frustrating to follow somebody who couldn't string up a sentence even in normal human interactions. Like she'd be having a normal conversation with a colleague of hers, somebody who she's comfortable with, and the colleague will ask her a super normal question like, would you like a cup of tea or a glass of water? And she'd be like, no, yes, I don't know. Both the character in this book and the character in The Death of Mrs. Westaway are exactly the same way. They'd be asked a question and they'd be stumbling through words like they have never had a conversation with a human being before. And that is very frustrating to follow. It could be okay for like a scene or two or a few, but you cannot convince me that somebody's entire personality is they're awkward and clumsy. I know awkward and clumsy people, and they're not just that. They have other dimensions of their character that aren't just this. And so Yes, I hated following this main character just as much as I hated following the main character in The Death of Mrs. Westaway. But it wasn't just her inability to string up a sentence. It was also the actions that she took. They didn't really make sense to me. Like, you're discovering some sort of mystery and then you go on investigating yourself instead of including the police. Why? What is the reason for that? I think the author has tried to make it so that she's trying to protect people that are close to her and not hurt them. But you're pregnant. You're purposefully going into situations that can put you and your baby at risk. If you wanted to know, you could have included the police, because her intention was to tell the police anyway, no matter what the result of her investigation was. So why not include them from earlier? Share with them these new evidence that she has come upon. Why keep it from them and then put herself and her baby in danger for no reason? And talking about the baby, there was an aspect of this book where the main character gets this high blood pressure. She's suffering from this high blood pressure the whole time, and I think the author has tried to put it as though this situation is raising her blood pressure. But in my opinion, it wasn't necessary. It went nowhere. There was no resolution to it. It didn't change the story. You could have removed that plot line entirely and nothing would have changed, except there would have been fewer pages in this book. But even worse, it made the actions of the character even more difficult to understand, because you know already that this is not good for you and your baby. And again, not only are you putting yourself in physical environment that can be harmful for you, but also you know that this stress is just gonna make it worse for the baby. Remember when I mentioned in the beginning that I would like the main character to make sense to me? Well, this one didn't, and her actions didn't make sense to me, and it was just frustrating to follow her around. There's one more thing I dislike very much, and that would be when the author writes a scene where the main character makes a decision, she comes to a conclusion, and then in the very next scene, she flips again and starts doubting all over again, often without any reason for it, without any prompting. She just goes back to this same loop. And while I can understand that this happens in real life to a lot of people, it is not very interesting to read because it's very, very repetitive. And not only were these scenes repeating, but it's also this thing where the author picks up a phrase and then beats you over the head with it. It's very frustrating. It was the same in The Death of Mrs. Westaway. And one more thing, the pacing of this story is terrible, in my opinion. It spent so long focusing on some very domestic, everyday scenes that ultimately led nowhere, that had nothing to do with the story, that didn't raise the tension or the pressure in any way. They were just there. It read kind of like a slice of life in so many ways, and it kind of slowed down the story so much. It made my reading experience very, very tedious. And here I would like to talk about the biggest reason why I dislike this book, and that is the genre that it's supposed to occupy. I am tired to death of domestic contemporary drama being sold to me as a thriller. Because this, ladies and gentlemen, to me, is not a thriller. There was a thrilling moment around the end, but beyond that, everything else read like a contemporary mystery / domestic drama. We have this pacing that is very, very slow. One thing that separates thriller from general mystery is the pacing. The time limit. There has to be a time limit, something that raises the stakes, something that keeps you on your toes. There was no such thing here at all. I wanted something to spook me, something to bring the tension, something to keep me thinking and guessing, and none of that happened here. I managed to guess who the killer was halfway through the book, and not because of anything laid out by the author, but because she has a certain way of presenting her killers. And then I already knew where the ending will go because of the way that she sets up these books. She sets them up again as contemporary novels, so you expect happy ending no matter what, and there is zero tension throughout the book. And so by the end of reading this, instead of satisfied, I felt just tired. And I ultimately made my decision to no longer read anything from Ruth Ware because I don't like wasting my time reading books that I don't enjoy, and I also don't like rating books low just because they didn't jive with me. I think this book might appeal to a lot of people, but I think those would be people who actually enjoy more contemporary domestic drama type books, and I'm definitely not one of those people. I rated this book 2 stars, and that's gonna do it for this video. Let me know whether you read the book, whether you're planning on reading it, whether you think that I might be wrong on some of these points, or whether you've noticed something else that I didn't mention here. Either way, thank you very much for watching. I very much appreciate it. I wish you all a lovely day, and I'll see you soon in another video. Once upon a time, there was a person who wasn't subscribed to my channel, and then they did, and they lived happily ever after. This could be you.